My name is Grace Richards, and I'm 31 years old. 3 weeks before my wedding, my future mother-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and snarled, "I'm canceling this wedding. Your pathetic, broken, divorced family and that worthless stepfather will humiliate my son and turn our church into a laughingstock. Trash like you has no right to stand at my son's altar." My fiancé stood right there and said absolutely nothing. Instead, he secretly rewrote the entire processional. When those church doors opened, my father took my left arm. My stepfather took my right. 200 guests gasped out loud. My mother-in-law turned ghostly white, shot up from her seat, and bolted out the side door like a coward. She wasn't running because she was embarrassed by my family. She was running because someone in that church knew the ugly truth about the first family she had completely erased. And that single moment shattered everything she had spent 30 years pretending to be. Before I take you back to the beginning, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now and what time is it? I love reading every single one. Let me start from the beginning. I met Ethan Whitmore when I was 26. He was an architect, the quiet kind, the kind who sketches floor plans when he's anxious instead of raising his voice. I loved that about him. I loved his patience, his steady hands, his way of solving problems with blueprints instead of arguments. What I didn't love was his mother. Judith Whitmore was the kind of woman who arranged flowers at the church on Sundays and expected the whole town to notice. She chaired the charity board. She hosted Easter brunch for 40 people. She had the best lawn on the block, the best china on the table, and the best smile in every room. The kind of smile that made you check your own reflection twice, wondering what you got wrong. The first time Ethan brought me to dinner at their house in Connecticut, everything was flawless. 4 place settings. Exactly 4. Not 5. Not 3. Fresh-cut peonies in a crystal vase at the center. Gerald, Ethan's father, shaking my hand with exactly the right amount of warmth and exactly the right release. And Judith, presiding over everything like a director watching her own production from the front row. She introduced the family the way you'd introduce a brand. "We're a close family," she said, straightening a napkin that was already straight. "Ethan is our only child." She said it twice during that dinner. Only child. Both times with a careful pause after, like she was placing each word into its designated slot. The dining room had photos on every wall: Gerald and Judith's wedding, Ethan's first birthday, family trips to Cape Cod. But nothing before 1992. No graduation photos of Judith. No childhood pictures. No high school portraits. As if she hadn't existed before the age of 28. I noticed it the way you notice a blank page in a photo album. Briefly, without understanding. It was just wallpaper. Harmless. I didn't think anything of it then. During dinner, Gerald mentioned something in passing. The kind of comment that floats by like background noise until you have a reason to turn up the volume. He was talking about travel, about places they'd visited, and he said, "We've been in this house since '92. Sometimes I forget there was anything before it." Judith's fork paused for exactly 1 beat. Then she laughed. "That's because there wasn't, Gerald. This is where our life started." He looked at her. Something flickered across his face. Not doubt, but the shadow of a question he'd decided long ago not to ask. Then he went back to his steak. I filed that exchange away without knowing what folder to put it in. It would be years before I understood what "before" meant, and why Judith needed everyone to believe it never existed. A few weeks later, Judith invited me to tea on their back patio. She sat in the high-backed wicker chair, the one that faced the garden and elevated her about 3 inches above everyone else. I sat on the low bench across from her. She poured the tea. She didn't drink. "Tell me about your family, dear," she said. Her voice was warm. Her eyes were measuring. "I want to understand your situation." So I told her. My parents divorced when I was 10. It was hard. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital. My father moved across town. The house got quiet in a way that houses shouldn't be when a kid is inside. Then Dale came. Dale? Judith repeated the name like she was tasting something she wasn't sure she liked. My stepfather. He married my mom when I was 13. He's been family ever since. Judith set her cup down carefully. The saucer didn't make a sound. That must have been so hard for you, she said. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping half a register. In our family, marriage is forever. I hope Ethan chose someone who believes the same. She let the sentence sit there like a test. I drove home replaying it. Marriage is forever. She'd said it like a commandment, not a value. Like she was drawing a line in permanent marker, and my whole family was on the wrong side of it. Maybe she's right, I thought, turning onto my street. Maybe I do carry baggage. That was the first time Judith made me feel small. It wouldn't be the last. I need to tell you about Dale. He came into my life when everything was still raw. Mom was pulling double shifts as an admin at St. Joseph's. Dad had moved into an apartment that smelled like carpet cleaner and loneliness. The house wasn't broken. It was just hollow. Dale fixed the porch railing first, then the leaky faucet, then the screen door that had been sticking since before the divorce. He did it without being asked, without making a speech about it. He just showed up with tools and got to work. He married my mom when I was 13. At the ceremony, he handed me a card. Inside, in his rough handwriting, he'd written, "I know I'm not replacing anyone. I'm just adding one more person who'll always show up." He built me a bookshelf out of oak for my bedroom. Solid, heavy, the kind of thing that doesn't wobble. I still have it. I'm 31 years old and I still have it because some things you keep not for what they are, but for what they prove. That someone once cared enough to measure twice. When I got engaged, Dale took me aside on the porch. "If that woman gives you trouble," he said, and I knew exactly which woman he meant. "Remember something. I chose to be your family. Nobody made me. And nobody gets to unmake it." I didn't understand the full weight of those words until later, 3 weeks before the wedding. I walked into the Whitmore living room expecting to discuss seating charts and program fonts. Judith was standing in front of the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, like she'd been positioned there by a photographer. Gerald sat in the corner armchair with a newspaper in his lap. He wasn't reading it. He was holding it the way men hold shields. "Sit down, Grace," Judith said. Not offering, directing. I sat on the sofa. The cushion was stiff. Everything in that house was stiff. "There are concerns about the ceremony," Judith began. Her voice was measured, each word calibrated. "Concerns I've raised with Gerald and which I believe Ethan understands." "What kind of concerns?" She unfolded her hands. "Your parents will both be present. Your father, your mother, and that man, your mother's husband. Dale." She said his name the way you'd name an insect you found on your tablecloth. "3 of them, Grace. In that church. In front of 200 people." She paused, took a breath, straightened her posture even further, which I wouldn't have thought possible. "Your divorced parents and stepfather will humiliate us. People will talk. The Whitmores do not need that kind of attention. I'm canceling this wedding." I looked at Gerald. His eyes flicked down to his newspaper. He turned a page. He didn't look up. I counted 3 seconds of silence. Then I stood. "Where's Ethan?" "He agrees with me. Then he can tell me himself." I found Ethan in the garage, bent over his drafting table. The pencil was moving fast, sharp lines, clean angles, something that looked like a floor plan but with no rooms, just walls, no doors. He always drew when he was churning inside, and whatever was churning tonight had no exit. "Your mother says you agree with her," I said. The pencil kept moving. Then it stopped. "I don't agree with her." His voice was flat, controlled. I've never agreed with her about this, about a lot of things. So you're just going to let her cancel our wedding? He set the pencil down, turned to face me. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not defeat, not frustration. Something closer to a decision that had already been made. I'm not going to fight her with words, Grace. She wins every argument. She's been winning arguments in this family since before I learned to talk. He paused. But I have a different plan. What plan? Trust me. 2 words. They were both a promise and a wall. He was asking me to let him handle it, without telling me how. I wanted to push. I wanted to demand specifics. But I'd seen his eyes. Whatever he was building in that head of his, it was already underway. I drove home with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed against my stomach, trying to hold something together I couldn't name. The streetlights blurred past like punctuation marks in a sentence I couldn't finish. I parked at my apartment and sat in the lot for 15 minutes. Not crying. Deciding. Then I called Dale. He picked up on the second ring. Didn't say hello. Just waited. Dale always knew when to wait. She wants to cancel the wedding, I said. Because of you. And Dad. She says we'll humiliate her family. Silence. 3 seconds. Then, do you want me there? Yes. Then I'll be there. And nobody gets to tell you your family isn't good enough to walk through a church door. I hung up. My hands had stopped shaking. I called my father next. Dad, I need you on my left arm. Dale on my right. Both of you. Together. My father's voice cracked. Not much. Just enough. You sure about this, sweetheart? I've never been more sure of anything. Have you ever had someone tell you your own family isn't good enough? What did you do? Judith didn't stop at the living room. 2 days later, she called my mother, Tammy Richards, who'd spent 20 years rebuilding a life after the divorce and didn't owe Judith Whitmore a single syllable of explanation. The call was supposed to be about seating arrangements. It wasn't. Mom told me about it that evening, her voice careful, the way nurses talk when they're delivering results. She didn't ask about seats, Grace. She asked about Dale, how long he'd been in the picture, whether he truly considers himself part of your family, her words, or whether he's just there. I closed my eyes. She also said one other thing, Mom continued. Some people just aren't built for family, are they? I thought she was talking about your father, but the way she said it, it almost sounded like she was talking about herself. That sentence stayed with me for days. Some people just aren't built for family. She aimed it at my father, but something in her voice made it sound less like an accusation and more like a confession she didn't realize she was making. A week before the wedding, I went to the Whitmore house to help Judith choose photos for the reception slideshow. She led me to the living room closet where they kept the family albums. Leather-bound, gold-edged, each one pristine enough to be a museum piece. I opened the first one. It began with Judith and Gerald's wedding. Beautiful. The dress, the flowers, the guests, every detail orchestrated down to the last champagne flute. But when I flipped to the very front of the album, where you'd expect an opening page, a dedication, early photos of the couple, there was a gap. One page, removed. Not torn. Cut. The edge was clean. Scissors straight. Judith, what happened to this page? She appeared at my shoulder faster than I expected. Her hand reached past me and closed the album. That old thing was damaged years ago, when we moved into this house. I should have had the whole album restored, but the rest of the album was immaculate. Not a single water stain, not a single dog-eared corner, not one wrinkle or crease across 200 pages. Everything survived the move. Everything except that one page. I let it go. On my way to my car, I took my phone out and photographed the gap, the clean edge, the precise cut. I zoomed in. Whoever removed that page didn't do it carelessly. They did it with intention. A page doesn't remove itself. While I was at the house, I'd noticed something else that I'd seen before without really seeing it. There were no photographs of Judith from before 1992. Not one. No graduation photos. No childhood snapshots. No school yearbook pictures tucked into frames. It was as if Judith Whitmore hadn't existed before the age of 28. As if she'd been born fully formed, like a character stepping onto a stage after the curtain rises. Most people don't notice what isn't on a wall. But I plan events for a living. I notice what's missing. 2 days before the wedding. The bridal shower. Judith's house, of course. Her territory. Her flowers. Her guest list. Her champagne. The women from her church circle hovered around the gift table like well-dressed moths. Donna, Ethan's grandmother, Judith's mother-in-law, sat next to me on the love seat. She was 86 years old, small, with hands that trembled slightly around her punch glass. Everyone treated her gently, the way people treat antique china they're afraid to lean against. During a lull in the noise, Donna leaned toward me. Her eyes were sharper than anyone in that family gave her credit for. "Your mother-in-law," she said quietly, "always was good at starting over." I almost missed it. "What do you mean, Gran?" Her eyes widened, not with confusion, but with the realization that she'd opened a door she'd kept locked for decades. Her hand found mine and squeezed, hard for someone whose knuckles swelled in the cold. Then she let go. Judith materialized from across the room. "Gran, are you telling your old stories again?" Her voice was light. Her eyes were blades. "Don't bore the bride now." Donna went silent. She picked up her glass and stared at the wall. The conversation was over. Starting over. She'd said it like it was a diagnosis. Like she'd been watching the symptoms for 30 years. And someone had cut the exam short before the results came back. 2 nights before the wedding. Rehearsal dinner. A private room at a restaurant downtown. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, the kind of place Judith selected because it photographed well. Dale walked in wearing a suit. The first time I'd ever seen him in one. He tugged at the collar like it was a leash. His hands, large, calloused from years of construction work, looked foreign wrapped around a champagne flute. Judith crossed the room. She extended her hand like someone lowering a drawbridge 1 inch at a time. "So," she said, "you're the one Grace calls her other father." Dale took her hand. He didn't squeeze. He didn't flinch. "I'm the one who stayed," he said. Something crossed Judith's face. Not contempt, which was what I'd braced for. Something faster, deeper, less controlled. If I hadn't been watching, really watching, the way you watch someone when you've stopped trusting their surface, I would have missed it entirely. Fear. She recovered in half a second, redirected with a social smile. "And where did you live before you met Tammy? Originally?" "Upstate New York," Dale said. Judith's jaw tightened. A micro-movement. A fracture in the mask. Then she excused herself to check on the appetizers, and I watched her walk away with her back too straight and her steps too fast for a woman checking on food. I leaned over to Ethan later. "Did you see your mom's face when Dale mentioned upstate New York?" Ethan shrugged. "She's just being difficult." But Judith wasn't being difficult. She was being careful. And careful people don't flinch at geography unless the geography means something. The next morning, she called. "About the reception speeches," she said. "I've been thinking we should limit them to immediate family." "Dale is immediate family." "He's your mother's husband. He's not your father, Grace." "He raised me for 21 years. Each word she spoke next landed separate and deliberate, like stones dropped onto glass from a careful height. "Raising someone else's child does not make you family." The silence lasted 3 seconds. I counted. "Then what does?" I said. She had no answer for that. "He'll be speaking," I said. That's final. I heard her breathing before she hung up. Fast, shallow, scared. The breathing of someone who'd just lost control of a conversation she'd assumed she owned. That afternoon, I was at the Whitmore house helping arrange decorations for the post-wedding brunch. I moved a side table in the living room and found a small wooden box in the bottom drawer of the cabinet behind it. Dark walnut, brass lock, old. The kind of box people keep because they can't bear to destroy what's inside, even though they can't bear to look at it either. Judith, what's in this pretty box? She crossed the room in 4 steps and took it from my hands. Not snatched, removed. With a precision that suggested she'd imagined this moment before. Just old junk, she said. I should have thrown it out years ago. But her hands were shaking. Not the startled kind. The exposed kind. The kind of trembling that comes from someone touching something they were never supposed to find. I filed it. The cut page. The locked box. The missing photos before 1992. The way Only Child sounded rehearsed. The way she flinched at upstate New York. The way she said, "Some people aren't built for family," like she was reciting her own medical record. She hid things the way people hide bodies. Carefully. In places she thought nobody would ever look. I went back to my apartment that night and sat on the kitchen floor with my phone, scrolling through what I'd collected. The photograph of the cut album page. A mental catalog. No photos before 92. A locked box with old junk that made her hands shake. A grandmother who'd been silenced mid-sentence. A geography that triggered a micro-flinch. None of it was proof of anything. All of it was proof of something. I'd spent my entire career as an event coordinator building timelines, tracking details, making sure every piece fits. Judith's timeline had gaps. Not the messy gaps that come from a disorganized life. The clean, surgical gaps that come from someone who edited their own history with scissors and silence. Something was missing from before 1992. Something bigger than a bad first marriage. Something she needed everyone, her husband, her son, her church, her community, to believe had never existed at all. The night before the wedding, my mother's porch. The streetlights had just come on, and the neighborhood was settling into that quiet hum that small Connecticut towns make when the day decides to let go. Dale came out and sat beside me. No coffee, no beer, no props. Dale never needed props for the conversations that mattered. "Your mother-in-law is afraid of me," he said. "I know, but not for the reason you think." He turned to look at me. "She's not afraid of what I am. Some guy who married a divorced woman and helped raise her kid. She's afraid of what I represent." "What do you represent?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm a man who walked into a broken family and chose to stay. For some people, that's a mirror they can't stand to look into. Because if staying was always an option, then leaving was always a choice." I didn't fully understand him. Not then. But the words settled into a place in my chest that I couldn't reach, and I knew they'd surface when the time came. That night, I dreamed about mirrors. In every one, someone was standing behind me, but the face kept changing. Morning, my wedding day. Mom helped me into my dress. She didn't cry. She smoothed the fabric across my shoulders and said, "You look like someone who's ready." Dale knocked at the door and handed me a small bouquet of wildflowers, not from a florist, picked from somewhere that morning, stems still damp. A note was tucked between the stems, his rough handwriting on a torn piece of cardboard. "For the bravest person I know." I stood in front of the mirror. Myself. My mother behind me, hands on my shoulders. Dale in the doorway, wildflowers in his fist. This was my family. Imperfect. Reassembled. Held together not by blood, but by choice. We drove to the church. My father was already there, standing at the entrance in a suit he'd probably ironed 3 times, wearing a tie I recognized. one my mother had given him years ago before the divorce. He'd kept it all this time. I didn't mention it. Some things don't need words. 2 men, one on each side. The way it should have always been. The doors opened. 200 faces turned. The organ swelled. Craig, my father, offered his left arm. Dale extended his right. I took both. We walked. The whispers started before we passed the 3rd row. I heard fragments floating up like bubbles. Who's the other man? Is that the stepfather? Both of them? Did Judith approve this? I kept my eyes forward. My heels clicked on the stone floor. Left. Right. Left. Right. Ethan was at the altar. When he saw us, all 3 of us coming toward him, he smiled. Not a surprised smile, a satisfied one. This was his plan. This was what he'd rewritten behind his mother's back. Then I saw Judith. Front row, right side. She was standing, though no one else was. Her face was white. Not embarrassed. White. Not angry white. Drained. Like someone had pulled a plug at the base of her skull and let everything run out. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, past the processional, past the pews, toward the very back of the church, toward someone sitting in the last row. I couldn't turn to see who it was. The aisle was pulling me forward. Then Judith moved. She stepped out of the pew, turned left, and slipped through the side door. Fast, deliberate, no hesitation. Like an exit she'd rehearsed for a moment she'd prayed would never come. Everyone saw. Nobody followed. The pew where she'd been sitting still had her hymnal open. Her reading glasses were on the seat. She'd left so fast she'd forgotten them. Judith Whitmore, who never forgot anything, who controlled every detail down to the angle of a napkin fold. She'd left her glasses behind. That was when I knew. Whatever made her leave, it wasn't embarrassment. Embarrassment is slow. Embarrassment is a flush and a quiet exit at the next convenient moment. What I just watched was flight. Pure, animal flight. The ceremony continued. Ethan took my hands at the altar. His palms were warm and steady. "She left," he whispered, "but I'm still here." The vows, the rings, the kiss. The church erupted. My father cried, silently, the way men cry when they've been holding something for 10 years and finally set it down. Dale nodded once. Once was enough. Donna, in the 2nd row, clapped slowly. Her eyes were wet, but there was something else in her face. Relief. After the recessional, I noticed the woman. She was in the last pew, the final person standing. Mid to late 30s. Simple dark dress, no heavy makeup. She wore a small locket on a thin chain around her neck. She was watching me the way people watch home videos of families they weren't invited to, searching for something familiar in someone else's story. She caught my eye, nodded once. Then she walked out the side door. The same side door Judith had used minutes earlier. I should have followed her. I didn't. That was a mistake. The reception was at the country club. String quartet, white tablecloths, champagne and flutes that cost more per glass than my first apartment's electricity bill. Everything Judith had insisted on when she still believed this day belonged to her. 40 minutes after the ceremony, Judith walked back in. Makeup retouched, posture restored, chin level. She moved through the room like the intermission was over and she was returning to her seat for the 2nd act. Gerald followed 2 steps behind, doing what Gerald always did, being present without participating. Judith didn't sit down. She went straight for the microphone. "I want to say a few words," she announced. The string quartet stopped. The room turned. "I want to welcome Grace into our family." Her voice was warm, practiced, the voice of a woman who'd spent 30 years reading from a script nobody else could see. I know her journey hasn't been easy. Growing up in a... She paused. The pause was a weapon. Complicated family situation, but the Whitmores have never been the kind of people who judge. We embrace. We accept. We open our arms. She looked at me with an expression that, from across the room, might have passed for love. From where I was standing, it looked like a perimeter. Some people come from perfect families, she continued, her gaze sweeping the room like a searchlight. Some people don't. But love covers all things, doesn't it? Polite applause, thin, the kind of applause that happens because silence would be worse. A few people exchanged glances. The woman at table 9, a college friend of mine who'd known me since freshman year, shifted in her chair and caught my eye. She mouthed, "Are you okay?" I wasn't. But not for the reasons she thought. Because I'd just watched a woman who bolted from a church 40 minutes earlier walk back in and deliver a speech designed to rewrite the narrative of why she'd left. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A reframe. She'd turned my family's presence into a problem and the Whitmores' tolerance into a gift. In 90 seconds and 4 sentences, she'd converted her cowardice at the church into benevolence at the reception. That was Judith Whitmore's skill. Not lying, she was good at that too, but reframing. Making the truth look like the lie and the lie look like generosity. I walked to the balcony. Dale followed. She turned it into her victory, I said. Dale leaned against the railing and shook his head. No, she turned it into her defense. There's a difference. People who give speeches like that aren't celebrating, they're fortifying. She ran out of a church and came back with a toast ready in 20 minutes. That's not embarrassment. That's damage control. He looked back into the ballroom. She's afraid, Grace. Not of you. Not of me. Of something older than either of us. She ran from the church. She came back with a speech ready. What do you think she's really hiding? I noticed something else during the toast. Judith had moved Donna's place card. Donna was supposed to be at the family table, 3 seats from me. Now she was at table 12, near the back, next to the restrooms. She'll be more comfortable away from the noise, Judith explained to the event coordinator. But Donna's hearing was fine. Her mind was fine. The only thing wrong with Donna's position was that it was too close to mine. Judith was separating her from me, the way you'd separate a witness from a lawyer. I found Donna at her reassigned table, sitting alone, holding a glass of water she hadn't touched. Gran. I pulled up a chair. At the shower, you said she was good at starting over. I need to know what that means. Donna's eyes swept the room. Judith was across the ballroom, deep in conversation with 2 women from the church board. I shouldn't have said it, Donna whispered. She'll be furious. Who? About what? Donna's hands folded and unfolded on the tablecloth. Folded, unfolded, making a decision. Your mother-in-law had a different life before Gerald, she said. Each word was careful, deliberate. The words of someone who'd been rehearsing a confession for 3 decades. A whole different life, before this house, before this church, before any of us. What kind of... Donna's eyes shifted. Judith was crossing the room, heading our way. Social smile locked in place. We'll talk later, dear, Donna said. She picked up her water and took a long, deliberate sip. A whole different life. The words sat in my chest like a key to a lock I hadn't found yet. I found the lock 20 minutes later. Judith was in the VIP restroom. The door was ajar. She was gripping the marble counter with both hands, staring at her reflection. Her makeup was smeared under one eye. The faucet was running full blast, but she wasn't washing anything. She was staring at the mirror the way you stare at something you're trying to unbecome. Donna told me, I said. Judith's knuckles went white. She said you had a different life before Gerald. 3 seconds of nothing. The faucet filled the silence. Then Judith straightened. turned to face me. Her eyes were hard, practiced. "I was married before," she said. Flat, clipped. "Very briefly. Very young. It was a mistake. I don't talk about it because it's ancient history. You were married before. It was nothing, Grace. It was nothing." I let the words sit. "You tried to cancel my wedding because my parents are divorced. You called my stepfather that man. You said my family would humiliate yours. And you were divorced the whole time?" Her chin lifted. "That was different. I was 19. It lasted less than 2 years. I made a terrible choice, and I left it behind." "How is that different, Judith?" "Divorce is divorce." "Because I built something real afterward," she snapped, then caught herself, lowered her voice. "I started over. I created a real family with Gerald. A lasting family. I didn't drag my mistakes into a church and parade them." But her hands were trembling. Not from anger. From underneath anger. The shaking of someone whose lie has developed a hairline fracture and is starting to leak. Then she pivoted. 30 years of survival instincts activated in a single breath. Tears. Sudden. Full. Her shoulders dropped, her voice crumpled. "You don't know what that marriage did to me," she said. "You don't know what I went through, what I survived. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to protect this family from the same kind of pain I went through." She pressed both palms to her face. "Please, Grace. Not today. Can we just get through today?" I stood there. My mother-in-law was crying in a bathroom on my wedding day. The part of me that had spent 20 years smoothing over, keeping peace, absorbing, that part wanted to say okay. That part wanted to hand her a tissue and walk away. But another part of me, the part that notices cut album pages and locked boxes and missing photographs, that part heard something. She said, "A mistake." She said, "I started over." She said, "It was nothing." She didn't say, "No children." She didn't say it. I left the bathroom. The door clicked behind me. She bought herself time. But time was the one thing she didn't have left. I walked back into the reception hall and found Ethan at our table. He was turning his wedding ring slowly, the way he turns his pencil when he's working through a structural problem. "Your mom was married before," I said. He looked up. "What?" "Before your dad. She was married. She just told me." Ethan went still. Not surprised. Still. The stillness of a man who'd always sensed a hollow space behind the wall, but never had a reason to knock on it until now. "She never mentioned that," he said. "Not once." "No," I said. "She didn't. And she was very careful about what else she didn't mention." What happened next changed everything. I was near the dessert table replaying the bathroom conversation when I heard Ethan's voice from across the room. Louder than usual. Strained in a way I'd never heard from him. I turned. He was at the bar. Standing in front of him was the woman from the church. The one from the last pew. The locket. The simple dress. She was holding an envelope, and she was calm in a way that was more unsettling than any argument. I walked over. I caught the end of her sentence. "I'm sorry to do this here, but I've been looking for 36 years, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get another chance." Ethan was gripping his bourbon glass so hard his knuckles were ridged. "What did you say your name was?" "Bridget. Bridget Calloway." She paused. The pause was the kind that holds 36 years of rehearsal inside it. "I believe we have the same mother." The glass slipped. Bourbon sluiced across the bar and onto Ethan's sleeve. A waiter materialized with a cloth. Ethan didn't notice. "That's not possible," he said. "I'm her only child." Bridget didn't flinch. She'd spent decades preparing for those exact words. "I know that's what she told you." She told everyone that. Her voice was even. Not hostile, not pleading. the voice of a social worker who has spent her career delivering hard truths to people who aren't ready to hear them. But I have the documentation. She opened the envelope and withdrew a single document, yellowed, creased along the fold lines, bearing the seal of a county clerk's office in Albany, New York. A birth certificate. She held it up. Mother, Judith Ann Calloway. Your mother's name before she changed it, Bridget said. Before she moved to Connecticut. Before she became someone else. Ethan stared at the paper, then at Bridget, then at me. His face was doing something I'd never witnessed, dismantling itself, tearing down a structure he'd lived inside for 33 years and finding empty space behind every wall. I need to find my mother, he said. He found her near the string quartet, champagne in hand, mid-story with two women from the church board, laughing at something, performing. Mom. She turned, still smiling. Then she saw Bridget standing behind Ethan, holding the envelope, and the smile didn't fade. It collapsed. Floor by floor, brick by brick, the whole facade coming down in real time. Who is this? Ethan said. Judith looked at Bridget the way cornered animals assess the space between themselves and the exit. I have no idea who this woman is. Judith's voice was pitched for the surrounding tables. She's clearly confused. Or this is some kind of scam. Bridget held up the birth certificate. Your maiden name, your signature. The hospital in Albany, 1988. Shall I read the attending physician's name? It's Dr. Bernard Hoffman. I have his records. Gerald. Judith spun to her husband, who had materialized at the edge of the gathering crowd. Gerald, tell them this is absurd. Gerald took the birth certificate from Bridget's outstretched hand. He read it once. He read it again. Slower. Then he looked at Judith with an expression I'd never seen on his face. Not anger, not hurt, but the slow realization that the woman he'd shared a life with had a name he'd never been told and a daughter he'd never been told about. You told me there were no children from that marriage. His voice was quiet, not a shout, a statement of fact being revised. Those were your exact words. No children. He placed the birth certificate on the nearest table. He set his champagne glass beside it, and he walked out of the reception. Didn't run, didn't slam anything, just walked. The way people walk when they've decided to leave something that used to be permanent. Judith watched him go, her jaw set, her shoulders squared. Then she grabbed the DJ's microphone. Everyone, I apologize for this interruption. Her voice was brittle, but amplified. This woman is a fraud. Anyone can fabricate a document. She probably found my name on the internet and concocted this entire story for attention. Or money. She pointed at Bridget. Security should remove her immediately. The room split. Some guests looked away. Some stared. One of Judith's church board friends quietly gathered her purse and left her table. Bridget didn't react. She stood perfectly still, one hand on her locket. My father kept everything, she said. Her voice didn't need a microphone. The room was quiet enough. Your marriage certificate to him, the divorce filing, which you submitted without requesting custody, not joint, not contested. You simply didn't ask for me. She opened the locket. A small photograph inside, a man in his early 40s, dark hair, tired eyes, half smiling. His name was Scott Calloway. He raised me by himself until he died when I was 15. After that, the state of New York raised me. Foster care. 3 families in 3 years. She closed the locket. He never stopped hoping you'd come back. The silence in that room wasn't the awkward silence of a bad toast. It was the geological silence of a fault line shifting. 200 people recalculating 30 years of charity events, Easter brunches, and Christmas cards from the Whitmores. 200 people looking at the woman who'd arranged flowers at the altar every Sunday and realizing the altar had been built on top of a grave she'd dug herself. Judith's voice cracked. I was 19. I wasn't ready. You were 26 when you left, Bridget said. I was 2. I remember nothing about you. My father told me you had dark hair and a laugh that could fill a room. He kept one photograph of you. I kept it after he died. That's my entire inheritance from you. One photograph and a birth certificate. Nobody moved to stand with Judith. Gerald was gone. The church board friend was gone. Ethan was holding the birth certificate with both hands, staring at a sister's name he'd never been allowed to learn. Then Donna stood up. 86 years old. Arthritic knees. She placed both palms on the tablecloth and pushed herself upward. It took her 8 seconds. Nobody helped her because nobody needed to. The room understood they were watching something that had been waiting 30 years to happen. She walked to the front. Slowly. Each step a decision. It's not a piece of paper, Judith, Donna said. Her voice was thin as thread but clear as glass. She looked at Bridget. I was there. I was there when you brought her home from the hospital. I held her. I held you. You were crying. Happy crying. The only time I ever saw you happy cry. Her name was Bridget, and she had your eyes. Judith grabbed Donna's arm. Mother Whitmore, you're confused. You're 86 years old. You get confused. Donna pulled her arm free. Slowly. The way you remove something fragile from a careless hand. I am not confused. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a photograph. Small, yellowed at the edges, soft from being held 1,000 times. Judith, 24 years old, holding a baby girl with dark hair and wide, startled eyes. On the back, in faded ink, Judith and Bridget, 1989. I kept this for 36 years, Donna said. Because I knew someday, somebody would need to see it. Ethan took the photograph, looked at it, looked at Bridget, looked at the woman he'd called Mom for 33 years. You told me I was your only child. His voice didn't break. It came apart. Controlled demolition, each word placed like a charge. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every single time I asked why I didn't have brothers or sisters, you looked me in the eye and said, "You're all I ever needed." And the whole time there was a person, a whole person, you just erased. Judith opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I stepped forward. Didn't take the microphone. Didn't need it. The room was quiet enough to hear dust settle. You told me that raising someone else's child doesn't make you family. I pointed to Dale, who was standing by the wall, hands at his sides, solid as always. That man raised me for 21 years. He chose to stay. I turned to Bridget. And the daughter you left behind is standing right here. She didn't come for revenge. She came because she wanted to see the face of the woman who left and never looked back. I looked at Judith. You don't get to define what family means. Not in this church. Not in this room. Not anymore. Judith placed the microphone on the table. Carefully. Controlled until the last possible second. Then she walked toward the door. Not the side door. The front door. Through 200 people, every one of them watching. Her heels on the hardwood were the only sound, getting quieter, getting smaller. 10 seconds of silence after the door closed. Then Dale crossed the room. He walked to Bridget, extended his hand. The same calloused, steady hand that had built me a bookshelf when I was 12 and held wildflowers that morning. I don't know your story yet, he said, but you should sit with us. Bridget looked at his hand, at his face, at the table where my mother sat, where my father sat, where Ethan was still holding a photograph of a sister he'd spent 33 years not knowing about. She sat down. Donna reached across the table and took her hand. Bridget looked down at their joined hands. The 86-year-old woman who'd kept a photograph in her pocket for 36 years, and the 38-year-old woman who'd kept a locket around her neck for just as long. Two people who had been waiting, one forced into silence, one forced into searching. Finally sitting at the same table, holding on. My father, sitting 2 chairs down, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He'd walked into this church that morning worried about fitting in. Now he was watching something that made fitting in irrelevant. Ethan reached across and placed his hand on top of Donna's and Bridget's. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Dale sat back down next to me. He didn't comment on what had just happened. He picked up his fork, took a bite of wedding cake, and said, "Good cake." I almost laughed. Almost. If someone in your life chose to stay when they didn't have to, this story is for them. Tag them. Or just remember them. The reception continued. Not the way I'd planned it. Not the way Judith had scripted it. Better. Some guests left early. A few of Judith's church circle gathered their things with compressed smiles and murmured congratulations on their way out the door. But the people who stayed, and most of them stayed until the last dance. Donna sat with Bridget for over an hour. She talked more that evening than I'd heard her talk in 5 years combined. She told Bridget about the apartment in Albany with the yellow curtains, about the day Judith brought her home from the hospital, about the morning 2 years later when Judith packed a single bag and said, "I need a fresh start, Mother Whitmore. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Donna's hands shook around her water glass. I wanted to stop her, but she told me, she said if I ever told Gerald, if I ever told anyone, she'd make sure I never saw Ethan. Her voice thinned to almost nothing. She used my love for my grandson as a lock, and I let her. For 30 years, I let her. Because every Wednesday when I picked Ethan up from school and we got ice cream and he told me about his day, I couldn't lose that. I couldn't. She looked at Bridget. I chose the grandchild I could reach. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Bridget squeezed her hand. You chose the child in front of you. That's not weakness, Donna. That's what parents do when they're given impossible choices. My father made impossible choices too. He chose to stay and raise me alone when everything in him probably wanted to chase after her and ask why. Donna cried then. Quietly, the way very old people cry. Without sound, just tears running down lines they'd already carved. Ethan sat with Bridget later that night. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They sat across from each other like two people who'd been reading the same book their entire lives without knowing the other copy existed. I don't need a brother to fix anything, Bridget told him. I don't need you to feel guilty or make up for lost time. I just need someone who knows I exist. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I know you exist, he said, and I'm sorry it took 33 years and a wedding to prove it. Here's what happened after. Gerald filed for divorce within the month. 30 years of marriage ended not with a fight, but with paperwork, and a silence that filled every room of the house in Connecticut. It wasn't just the secret about Bridget, though that was the crack that split the foundation. It was the math. 30 years of no children from that marriage. 3 decades of looking him in the eye and maintaining a lie so fundamental it rewrote the entire architecture of their life together. Gerald couldn't forgive the lie, not because he was cruel, because he couldn't locate, in 30 years of shared history, a single moment he could now trust. Judith resigned from the church board before they could ask her to step down. Classic Judith. Controlling the exit even when the exit was a collapse. She didn't apologize. She hasn't called Ethan. I don't think she will. Apologizing would require acknowledging that the life she built was built on erasure, and Judith Whitmore has never been able to look at empty space without trying to fill it with something that makes her look whole. Ethan set one boundary, clean and clear. When you're ready to tell the truth, All of it. Every piece. You can call me. Until then, don't. Donna was free. For the first time in 30 years, she didn't have to check the room before she spoke. She met Bridget for lunch every other Wednesday at a diner near Donna's apartment. Same booth each time. Donna would bring another photograph, another fragment of the life Judith had tried to incinerate. Bridget would listen. Sometimes they'd just sit and hold hands across the table, two people who'd found each other 36 years late. Bridget never asked Judith for an apology. An apology from someone who erased you isn't worth the air it rides on, she told me once. I didn't come for forgiveness. I came because my father told me, when I was 12 and old enough to ask, that somewhere out there was a woman who chose to leave. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with sadness. And I wanted to see her face when she finally couldn't leave anymore. Dale didn't change. That was the thing about Dale. He didn't need a dramatic reveal or a public vindication to know who he was. He'd known who he was since the day he married a divorced woman with a 10-year-old daughter and decided that was his family now. No announcement. No ceremony of commitment beyond the ceremony itself. Just presence. Daily. Unremarkable, unshakable presence. The morning after the wedding, he showed up at our new apartment with a toolbox and fixed the front door latch that had been sticking since we moved in. He brought wildflowers again. No note this time. None needed. He'd said everything already, not in the speech at the reception or the card in my bouquet, but in 21 years of showing up. 21 years of being the man in the doorway. That was his speech. Repeated every day. Without a microphone. And me? I stopped apologizing for my family. For 20 years, I'd carried the quiet shame of being the girl from the divorced home. The girl whose family tree had branches that didn't match. The girl who had to explain at every parent-teacher night why she had two fathers in the audience and why one of them didn't share her last name. I'd carried it like luggage I thought I deserved. Heavy, awkward, something I had to apologize for every time I set it down in someone else's space. Judith Whitmore taught me something she never intended to teach. The people who scream loudest about perfect families are usually the ones hiding the most fractured truths. She built a 30-year fortress out of lies, charity boards, locked boxes, and fresh-cut peonies. She cut pages from albums and cut people from her history with the same steady hand. She wielded family like a weapon. Against me, against Dale, against her own mother-in-law, while carrying the deepest betrayal of family I've ever witnessed. And it took one document, one 86-year-old woman with a photograph in her cardigan pocket, and one daughter who refused to stay erased to bring the whole thing down. She said my stepfather wasn't real family, but he chose to stay. She's the one who chose to leave. The people who judge your family the loudest are always hiding the worst secrets about their own, and the ones who show up without being asked. Those are your people. Hold on to them.